It is now my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Father Bernard Pottier. Father Pottier is a Jesuit priest, a native of Liège in Belgium, an eminent scholar who has published many works on philosophy, patristics, and psychology. He is a member of the International Theological Commission, a professor at the Brussels Institute for Theological Studies, and also a linguist who speaks French, Dutch, German, Italian, English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But today he has kindly agreed to speak to us in English. Please give a very warm welcome to Father Bernard Pottier.
Good morning, everybody. So I am a French-speaking Jesuit from Belgium. I don't speak so good English, but I try to do my best now. So we have two parts in my talk. First, the disappearance of female diaconate, and the second part is a lot of witness text of the first millennium, the history of the deaconesses. And so we have my PowerPoint. Doesn't work. Excuse me, but... Okay.
Have you got it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't know why it's doing that.
This is the first part. Should we follow tradition and so on? 5 points. And then we have the witness texts of the first millennium. But we begin with the first. Should we follow the tradition in the question of the diaconate? An institution which wants to keep its unity, like the Catholic Church, must reflect on its decisions according to its entire tradition, which also gives it weight and strength. We must understand what animated our predecessors, not to judge them, but to see what we are going to do with their heritage, and especially with the heritage of Christ, to preserve all its richness, while adapting it to the richness of our present time. Of course, our present time is also very rich. The permanent male diaconate disappeared long before that of women. It was not existent for centuries and centuries during the second millennium, and yet it was finally restored after the Second Vatican Council. The permanent female diaconate has also disappeared, having known a longer existence than that of the man. And if it is to be restored, it is undoubtedly the same path of theological and ecclesiastical reasoning that will be followed. Second point, for the earliest time, deacons have been ordained according to the formula not ad sacerdocium episcopi sed, but ad ministerium episcopi. That text is very ancient, but it's also in the Vatican II. What does this formula mean? At first, only the bishop celebrated the Eucharist in his diocese, surrounded by his presbyterium around the altar. That is to say, the group of men who today are called priests, and who assisted the bishop in the exercise of his priesthood. This priest, therefore, took care of the spiritual task for which the bishop was responsible. It was only later, when parishes were created around the episcopal cities, that priests were sent far away and celebrated Mass there for the local community, in the absence of the bishop, but in his name. The formula concerning the ordination of priests is therefore clear. They assist the bishop in his priestly office, ad Sacerdocium Episcopi. This is clearly the Eucharist and the sacraments in general. As for the deacon, they also assist the bishop. They also assist the bishop, but precisely not in his priestly office, not at sacerdocium, but rather in the ministry for which he is responsible, set at ministerium episcopi. What ministry is it which would be different from priestly office? It is about the ministry of the word, of charity, and possibly of the liturgy, but without taking the place of the priests for the question of the Eucharist and the sacraments. You see here a diagram, triangular, because the ordination is from the bishop to deacons or to priests. But it's not the diagram so deacons, priest, bishop. That is for the second millennium. The second millennium. It's very important for me. It seems to me for the history to understand that. From the beginning, the deacons were the privileged and personal assistants of the bishop for all that concerns the material organization, and in particular the finances. And the question of the finances, of course, was obviously included the question of assistance to the poor, like St. Lawrence, for example. You know the history of St. Lawrence, the assistance to widows, to all the works of charity for which the Church felt responsible. Another factor had intervened here, and it is of immense importance. In the book of Acts of Apostles, chapter 6, the apostles laid hands on 7 men. Tradition has seen in this chapter the apostolic institution of deacons. That is to say that the apostles of Christ, but not Christ, the apostles of Christ instituted deacons. It is therefore a second generation institution. A second generation institution. A decision of the Church, not of Christ. And in relation with the female diaconate, it's very important for me. It's not a decision of Christ, but of the apostles. And the number 7 is also very important. In the early times, especially in Rome, the various bishops of the Roman dioceses provided themselves with 7 deacons, and no more. When the dioceses grew, the priests multiplied, while the deacons remained limited to the number of 7. That is very important. Little by little, a disproportion was established between the growing number of priests and the limited number of deacons. Now it happens that at that time, when one was looking for a successor for the deceased bishop, one could choose either a priest or a deacon as successors. We were not yet at the time when it was necessary to follow a fixed sequence: deacons, priest, bishop. Sequence which we call the cursus honorum. The cursus honorum. We did not have a linear structure, but rather a triangular structure. The bishop had on one side the priests in an undetermined number, and on the other side, how many deacons? 7. 7. The bishop had, it was he who coordinated the first, the priests for the spiritual task, and the others, the deacons, for the most material tasks. But the relationship between deacons and priests presented a certain tightness. One was ordained either priest or deacon, and remained so. And as we shall see, the deacon as well as the priest could become bishop directly, if chosen, directly. This is what I call the triangular structure of the church hierarchy at the time. This is a very important factor because precisely it will change over time in the second millennium following the generalized application by the Gregorian reform of the cursus honorum, which I will discuss later. This is what later we call the ordination per gradum, by degree, per gradum. And later, but retrospectively, we name that the ordination by saltum, per saltum, by jump. But it's by jump, not here. Here it's not by jump. But considering that, it's by jump. It's by jump. So, if you are deacon and you become a bishop, there is no saltum, there is no jump. But considering the thing from that structure, it's a jump. But retrospectively, it's very important. We have to judge the story not with the context of today of the Gregorian reform, but in the mentality of the time. So, this is how a rivalry arises between the deacons, powerful by their pragmatical functions in finances, for example, and by their rarely limited to 7, and the priests, more numerous, but individually less important, less expert in concrete and political affairs, and therefore perhaps less likely to be appointed bishops upon succession. The practice continued until the end of the first millennium, and imagine how important this was when it came to choosing the Bishop of Rome himself. That is to say, the Pope of all Christendom. Later, when the obligation of the linear sequence will be installed, so that one, yes, deacon, then priest, then bishop, one will discredit retrospectively the ordination which did not follow this sequence, the ordination per saltum, by jump, but here it's not per saltum, but retrospectively, yes, which will oppose to the so-called good ordination per gradum, by degree, with respect to this sequence. And that is the diagram after Vatican II, a combination between the first and the second diagram. You have the triangular with a permanent deacon, and at the same, a linear with deacon, transitory, priest, and bishop. But for most Christians today, unaware of this tradition of the first millennium, it's 1,000 years in our church, and the contact with Christ and the apostles. Unaware of this tradition, the linear structure seems so obvious that it is unimaginable to think of modifying it. So coming back here, reflection from the male permanent diaconate and its disappearance. Why disappear? Why do the deacons disappear? Two extremely important dates in the history of the Church are those of 313 and 380. The Edict of Milan and the Edict of Thessalonica make the Christian religion the official religion of the Roman Empire. The Church will adopt certain customs of the Roman Empire, very hierarchical, which knew a whole procedure of training in the administration and in the army. The empire, the Roman Empire, one made a career in these two fields, administration and army, by following a very specific course, a course which consisted of a certain number of stages, which had to be covered in order, in a sequence, and respecting the deadlines imposed between two successive stages. Like in the army today, you can become a general immediately. You have to step by step to go to the degrees, through the degrees. This procedure allowed both the gradual training of Roman officials and the military, and the examinations of their skills, of course, and loyalty. The Church quickly adopted this same system of cursus honorum, with a sequence of degrees, and not only the 3 degrees here, but 7 degrees, or acolyte, lecture, and so on. The old custom of ordination per saltum, diagram triangular, was upset. Standardization took place in the direction of a gradual disappearance of ordination per saltum, but the old law was repealed only very slowly. It should be added that at the old times the choice of the Bishop of Rome has been particularly delicate. Until the end of the 9th century, the bishop was usually elected from among the priests or deacons of Rome, with a preference in the latter case for the archdeacon. The scholar Andrieux has identified by name, without claiming to be exhaustive, 35 deacons who became popes. 35 deacons who became popes, and 22 Roman priesters who became popes. More deacons than presbyters. And in both cases, the same and unique ordination ritual was used. The same ritual. Another scholar, Fèvre, notes that between 687 and 891, 2 centuries, of the 28 popes who succeeded one another, 14 acceded to the episcopate of Rome per saltum, deacon, pope. 5 were never ordained priests, and 9 were never ordained deacons. Let us mention some of these popes. It's not curiosity, not. For example, Saint Leo the Great, Saint Gregory the Great were both deacons at the time of their election. Outside Rome, Athanasius of Alexandria rose directly from diaconate to episcopate. And Saint Augustine was presbyter, then bishop, and never deacon, without having been a deacon. But at the beginning of the 2nd millennium, Gregory VII, Hildebrand himself, the great initiator of the Gregorian reform, was chosen pope while he was archdeacon himself. However, it was he who subsequently repealed this custom, applying the reform to himself. He was the first deacon elected Bishop of Rome to receive priestly ordination before episcopal ordination. So 2 rituals for him. 2 rituals, not one and the same ritual. From now on, ordinations per saltum are therefore prohibited. Prohibited. In the canon law of 1917, it was explicitly said, like in that time of the Gregorian reform, that a bishop who ordains a deacon who does not have the aptitudes to become a priest and who does not intend to become a priest commits an error. And so it will, this sequence was imposed during 1 millennium because any bishop who ordains a deacon must intend to ordain him a priest as soon as possible thereafter. Well, that means being a deacon is what more important. It was transitory, but very transitory, fast transitory, while respecting the deadlines required by the cursus honorum, 1 year in general or shorter. Another important point is for the gradual and difficult imposition of the law of celibacy to the clergy. It's important also for women, of course. The oldest imperative concerning ecclesiastical continence dates back to the decretals of the popes at the end of the 4th century. It's true, 4th century. But the ordination of married men is not forbidden. It's not forbidden. But continence is imposed on them after ordination. So the life in couple was not possible, or with many difficult rules. The ordination of married men, therefore, remained possible, but all sorts of measures were taken against married clergy. But married clergy remained during 6 centuries, till the Gregorian reform. However, with many difficulties. At the time, canonical science had not yet been born. That is important. Canonic science had not yet been born. The decree of Gratian is the beginning of canon law. A host of local synods will recall in France these rules of continence, showing both the determination of the Church to have them observed, but at the same time, by the repetition, the concrete difficulties constantly encountered to impose the rule. Both think the rule and the reality, the tension. Things will not change before the Gregorian reform, the Second Lateran Council in 1139, and the late birth of canon law. The Decree of Gratian, which is the source of modern canon law, ratify all this, impose the cursus honorum, the sequence, linear sequence, and celibacy on male clerics. And the same decree excluded women from the diaconate, and therefore from the clergy, until today in West. The date of 1140 therefore appears in the history of theology and of the Church as a turning point. In the century following the Great Schism, what is the explanation of that all? For me, it's the Great Schism of the East from the West. The West from the East. The Western Church asserted itself through a number of historical important decisions. Imposition of celibacy for the first time on all Catholic clergy. Henceforth, disappearance of both married priests and permanent male deacons at the same time, because it was also transitory. And elimination of the ordination per saltum and also of diaconesis the female diaconate suffers also of that, from that. Over time, a certain tradition, so today we have a tradition, it's so. Tradition for many people is this one, no? But actually it's this. But for many mentality it's still that. Over time, a certain tradition, revisionist and even negationist, affirmed that women deacons were not really ordained, because not in the sequence, but only received a blessing, an institution, an establishment, etc. Others even went so far, sometimes out of ignorance, as to deny that there ever exists. That's the second part of my talk. But the recent motu proprio of Pope Benedict XVI re-establishes a little bit the triangular diagram. I'll let you read the text. There is a difference between a bishop and priests, acting in the person of Christ, the head, and deacons. A very clear difference. This canonical distinction made by Pope Benedict XVI seems to me, to us, favorable to a reconsideration of the triangular schema, and consequently to an opening to the female diaconate. Benedict XVI is probably not in favor of it himself, but it's my interpretation, but I think it's important, but out of intellectual honesty, it seems to me, he wanted to dismiss from the path of reflection an argument which he knows to be fallacious about the alleged unity of the sacrament. The unity of the sacrament. It's a big argument of certain people against the ordination of women, no? The unity. But the unity in the scheme, linear scheme. The alleged unity of the sacrament, but which many opponents of the female diaconates use. Indeed, if we erase the difference between priesthood and diaconate, not that, the contrary, not what the mentality thinks, is we reinforce their resemblance or mutual belonging to the point of identify sacrament of holy orders and priesthood. It's not the same, holy orders and priesthood. Then the diaconate would necessarily entail the idea of priesthood. But it's not the case here. Even in the case of male permanent deacons, whose ordination would not be incomplete, complete. So, in this diagram, what is the permanent deacon? An incomplete priest for the mentality of the unity of the sacrament. But it's not true. He's really an ordained man. So, I pass to the second part of my exposition, but perhaps faster. We have a lot of witness texts that spoke about diaconesses, about women deacons in the first millennium. A lot of texts. We can read them in whatever library, no? But people don't know that. All that is here in my little book, a small book, Le Diaconat Féminin, Jadis et bientôt, then and soon, hopefully, then and soon. All the facts are here with the reference and so on. Here I erase the notes, of course. I have 7 copies for you if you want it at the price of 10 euros. So, first section, in the East. We have in the East the Didascalia of the Apostle, for example, Syria, the date is there, speaks about women deacon in Syriac language, with 2 names for man and woman. Shamshona for deacon and Shamshonito for deaconess. It's late after the apostles. The apostolic constitution is very important because it's the first text, very clear and very interesting, with a ritual of ordination. I let you read a moment. The constitution in general distinguishes widows, virgin, women deacons. The women deacons are unquestionably part of the clergy, unlike virgin and widows. They seem to play an intermediary role between the women and the male members of the clergy, taking care of baptism, welcoming women in liturgical assemblies. They hold the first rank among women before virgin and widows. The bishop lays his hand on them. In Greek, epitheses das kairas. Kairas is hands. Epitheses, to put on. General. In presence of the presbyterian, the deacons, and the diaconesses. So, it's a very complete ritual of the ordination. The Testament of our Lord Jesus Christ speaks also about diaconesses. And the difference with the West is huge. All those texts doesn't speak about women deacons. In the West, doesn't speak. None of these Western texts that speak of deacons, clearly, mention deaconesses. Only the exegetical commentaries of Ambrioster and Pelagius see in the female diaconate, only a survival of a use from the apostolic period, a witness organ, perhaps without future, which at least the Roman Church is unaware of. At that time in Rome, no female diaconate. The Ambrosiaster also denounced the pride of Roman male deacons. The Ambrosiaster is also against male deacons, not only deaconesses. And the female diaconate was the prerogative of the Montanists that will say heretics. For them it's heretics. But there are universal council, mostly in the East precisely. I didn't say anything about the Council of Nicaea, where the word diaconissa appears for the first time. Not he diakonos, the article, feminine article with the masculine name, but really a new feminine name. The Council of Chalcedon but the Council of Trullo, it's not a universal council, but proposed that. You see, it's a tension between married priests, and when a married priest becomes bishop, the wife, by mutual agreement, go to a monastery and can be promoted to the dignity of diaconess. It shows the tension between the things, no? The history is not a model for us. It's just a thing to, a manner to thinking about the variety of the possibilities, no? And the tradition is much more flexible than we are thinking. Very interesting is also the imperial legislation. Different thing about the heritage of the women deacons, the heritage in the first and second point. And here, the number of deaconesses in Constantinople, not more than 40. Not more than 40. And there are people saying they don't exist. They never read this text. And you see here, they will be virgins or monogamous widows. So widows, but of a first marriage, not of a second or third marriage. It's also in St. Paul for the deacon. Local councils in Gaul, that will say in France. Many, the West seems to have often been reserved about women's ministries, especially in France, where several small local councils repeating themselves prohibit anything that could resemble ordination or consecrations of women deacons, reducing them at best to the rank of widows. The insistence is the index at the same of a certain presence of this woman in the church. When the law came to say I prohibit something, it means that it exists, no? And after a century we say the same because it remains as a proof, no? And you see, for example, in point third, and however, point 5, you see that the daughter of Saint Remy, a big bishop in France, is deacon. And Saint Ragundo, wife of Clotaire, not virgin and not unmarried, is deacon. And we have 3 books with the life of Saint Ragunda. He was a very big figure in France at that time. An objection, often I hear, yes, but deaconess is the wife of the deacon. Is it true? Yes, it's true in certain contexts. But the context in general is very clear. Let us read that 2 council. The difference is evident, obvious. The first is a woman deacon, and the second is the wife of the deacon. You see the difference, no? But you see also the law, the rule of the continents is very important for all that. More than 20 women deacons are honored by the calendar of the Orthodox Church. And we have many funerary inscriptions with the name of diaconess on the tomb. Sometimes with the name, sometimes anonymous, but Moira Shimi, it's a great specialist of that in Italy, has found 62 funerary inscriptions of diaconissa and so on. The rituals and the decrees. There are many rituals, many, not so many, but they exist. I have here 2 rituals, but there are 4, 6, 7. In all the pontifical missals, there are copied. And decrees. Some popes issue decrees in the 11th century, accepting women deacons. But the turning point is here, the decree of Gracian. And it's a consequence of the Gregorian reform. And you see, not only for the ordination, but all for the trial. They have no power to accuse priests or to testify about them. It's very important for today, this, for the abuses and so on. No? And still in the canon law of 1917, there is something like that. Lay people cannot accuse priests, the clergy, in the civil law, in the civil trial. It's suppressed in the new canon law, but it was so. And prohibition with condemnation of excommunication. If a lay people, a man or woman, go to the civil. Yes, but many people are thinking it's in figure now. It's not true, but till 60 years ago, it was in figure. So the paragraph for who is interested in the canon law of 1917, paragraph 120, 2334 and 41. It's explaining that. Conclusion is the ordination of women deacon a sacrament? A sacrament. It's a big question, no? For men, it's a sacrament. It's clear for anybody. Not for me. Not for me. It's not clear. Because sacrament theology is not the same. Before the Gregorian reform, all the sacraments are different. For men, for women, for everybody. But many people think for the men it's evident it's a sacrament, and for women it's evident it's not. But I ask why? Where is the evidence? I didn't see the evidence. Because what? The concept of sacrament, broad and without definition, was current during the first millennium. You see, 2 bishops think there are 2 sacraments, no more, 2 sacraments. Saint Bernard, 10 sacraments. Peter Damian, 12 sacraments. They are all sacraments. What? Royal anointing, foot washing, and so on. So the ordination of men or women is the same. They are in the whole of the sacraments. Are they a real sacrament or not? It's the same reasoning for both. But the nascent scholastic taste for systematics wanted to fix that. So I give here the text of three eminent theologians and historians of the theology of sacraments. Another, Pelikan, and why was it accepted? It was welcomed as an answer from Providence to many of the insoluble questions posed by Western rationalist theologians of the era of Reform. They wanted to put everything in rule and in law and in categories. Not like in the East, not like in the first millennium. It was more the sacrality of the reality of the life of the church. And the mission you receive, that is important. I mean the rationalist theology of the West, after the schism with East, is very important, a turning point. For many things, but also for the ordination of women deacons. And for the celibacy of the clergy and so on. Finally, Ganocci. If we cast doubt on the sacramentality of the ordination of women deacons in the pre-Gregorian period, should we not do the same for all ordinations and all the sacraments and all the rituals? Since the so-called classical sacrament theology was not really born then later, at the time of the Gregorian reform and the time of the great theological sums. St. Thomas of Aquinas, for example, knew very well the two schemes, triangular and linear. And he is speaking about that and the advantage and the disadvantage of one scheme or the other. So, thank you very much.